Hello again. Today I'm here with my wrap up for the Books in the Freezer readathon. I had a lot of fun doing this readathon and I look forward to talking about these books. First off, let me remind you of the challenges. So the first challenge was to read a horror book by a female author, and for that challenge I picked Confessions by Kane Minato. And I really did enjoy this book. I found it a really interesting story. For those who aren't aware, the story revolves around this teacher whose daughter dies. They believe it was just drowning because the daughter was found in a pool. But the teacher realizes that it was actually two students that caused this. And she kind of confronts the whole class about it. And the first chapter where she's confronting this class is actually incredibly tense, and what she says she actually does in this class to these students is actually intense. I really did enjoy that first chapter. The way the book followed after that wasn't as good as that first chapter, but it still was pretty good. It followed how these students, after they were pretty much outed by this teacher that they killed her daughter, how they were treated, the relationships that they had, and just a nice way of seeing where these characters go. Very dark, considering that these are I believe grammar school kids. I mean, it does take place obviously in Japan because this is a foreign language. Well, this is based on a foreign story that was translated, but really good taunt thriller book. I really enjoyed it. I can't wait to read more by this author, and I'm going to give it a 4-star because it wasn't as good after the first chapter as the first chapter, but otherwise it really was a pretty quick and really gripping read. So that is Confessions. Next was read a horror anthology or short story collection, and for that I read an audiobook. I read Bentley Little's Walking Alone, which are a lot of short stories. You had some old short stories from the 80s, and then a bunch of short stories from 2016 and 2017. I always have problems with short story collections, and this was kind of no exception, especially in horror. A short story is usually a story for me that would be like a chapter in a book. It's kind of like, okay, here's like this dun 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 moment, but there's no kind of like resolution to it, or I feel like there should be more to the story being told. And I felt this in a lot of the actual short stories. Some of them are really short. Some of them are, I think a few of them are only like a paragraph long. So some of these are really short stories. Most of them are, a few pages to 10 or 15 pages. And while I did enjoy a bunch of stories in general as a short story collection, it didn't like blow my socks off. It wasn't like the Ronald Malfi short story collection. I loved every story. It did have that kind of incomplete feel at the end of some stories, like just, okay, we just ended it. But there were, again, some interesting stories. There was a really good story about a child who visits a neighbor, and the child starts using vulgar language, and the one mother is really upset about it. There's another story about snowmen. There's another story about a mall that's really interesting. There's a really good story about this hotel, which I really wish they would have kept going more into it, because this road trip that these characters take, and they wind up being at this hotel. I really wanted to see more of that story, because it did seem really interesting. In general, I would have to give it a 3.5 stars, because it wasn't the kind of story it wasn't the short story collection I thought was just knock your socks off, and I did get kind of annoyed by these kind of quick endings that some of these stories had, which is the nature of short story collections in general. Next reading challenge was read a horror book featuring a POC or LGBTQ person, and for that one I read The Cabin at the End of the World by Paul Tremblay, and I really like this book. This is a 5-star book. This is a great book. The story is about these 4 people who meet this gay couple and their child at a cabin, and these 4 people basically say that it is the end of the world and that somebody in this party that's in this cabin has to kill somebody else willingly in order to stop the end of the world. And they talk about all the different parts, because it's like multiple different things that are supposed to happen. And it's a very tense novel. It has a really tense kind of, captivity type of feel to it, because these four people gang up on this couple, this gay couple and their child. And again, I just really like the story. It is one of those stories again that has one of those kind of ambiguous endings, but it works in this story, and I really liked the story. I thought it was very well done, very tense, a very emotional story, and this is only the second Paul Tremblay book I've read, but I really like this book. I've heard that some people could say this is Paul Tremblay's best. That's what actually Stephen King blurbed on the cover, and I would probably agree with them until I read more Paul Tremblay. This is definitely a really good book. If you're thinking about picking this up, I highly recommend The Cabin at the End of the World. Next prompt was read a horror book that has a movie adaptation. And for that one, I picked Thinner by Stephen King, writing as Richard Bachman. I've seen the movie, actually, before I read this book. And I like the book. The book is different than the movie. Not totally different. It definitely has the flavor. The movie has the flavor of the book. But in some ways, I kind of liked the movie's portrayal of the main character. I felt like he was a little sleazier in the movie than he came across in this book. And if you don't know what the story is about, it's about a guy who gets cursed by a gypsy to be thinner. And he constantly keeps losing weight, cannot stop losing weight, to the point where he's almost dying. And while, again, I did enjoy this book, I thought it was a good book, I kind of liked the movie better, which I guess is horrible to say, especially for a Stephen King book. But I kind of liked what the movie did. I felt like the characters were a little bit more fleshed out, like I said, in the movie. There were some things in the book I liked. There were some things in the book that I liked that were better than the movie. But in general, just comparing them both, this is probably one of the few Stephen King books that I've read that, for some weird reason, I actually enjoyed the movie a little bit more. I'm going to give this a 3.5. I thought it was, again, a good Stephen King, but I've read a lot better. And that's basically my review of Thinner. And the last book on this list is read a book they recommend on the podcast. For this one, I picked Perfect Days. And I'm not going to really tell you much about this book, except that I did enjoy it. But if you really want to know more about this book, next Thursday, I believe it's the 25th of October, me, the Ellie Effect, and Cammy's Korner on this channel are going to be doing a live stream talking about this book. It's going to be on 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and I am looking forward to doing this, where I will talk about all my feelings about this book, along with, hearing Cammy's and Ellie's thoughts about this book. But I do look forward to this live show, so if anybody's interested, please, check out Ellie's channel, check out Cammy's Korner's channel. They're going to be talking about this as well on their channels, I believe. And please join us next Thursday for this live show. I'm sure we're going to have a great time. And that is Perfect Days. And that was all of the books for this readathon that I read. Again, if you like this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. And as always, thanks again for watching, and I hope to see you soon. Bye.